Good evening, welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I am the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have a very interesting program I'm sure you're all going to enjoy. Art Campbell has been interested in UFO research since the 1950s. He was an early NICAP investigator where he worked with Donald Kehoe and was chairman of a NICAP chapter in Kansas City, Missouri. He is a retired teacher and school administrator, a Navy veteran, and a published author. In 1994, with a map from a rancher, he visited the site of Plains of San Augustine, New Mexico, which is 165 miles west of Roswell, where some believe a UFO crashed in 1947, July. There he found a phenomenal amount of physical material and had it scientifically analyzed, including 7 kinds of unusual foil containing high levels of silicon, iron, and manganese, which are unknown to the foil industry. Much of this compelling research is documented in his book, UFO Crash at San Augustine. Now, Art has gone beyond field research with his groundbreaking exploration into the possible role of President Eisenhower in the UFO phenomenon. It was February of 1955. Gasoline was 23 cents a gallon, the minimum wage was 75 cents an hour, and President Eisenhower was in the 3rd year of his first term. The world was poised on the brink of international crisis. Eisenhower had just threatened the Red Chinese that if they invade Formosa, which is now Taiwan, they faced the threat of nuclear war. Our allies were concerned and angry, and the Russians were ready to explode their first megaton H-bomb. With all this on the international front, what does the leader of the free world do? He goes bird hunting in Georgia. At least that was the cover story. What really happened may be something else entirely, something involving off-world national security issues. Through his diligent research, Art Campbell has tracked down eyewitnesses that support the claim that Eisenhower was actually detoured to New Mexico's Holloman Air Force Base. Was it a coincidence that on that very day, the base radar was shut down and 2 UFOs were seen coming low into the airbase? Art has lectured for many UFO groups throughout the years and has been a featured guest on dozens of radio shows. Art even met President Harry Truman in 1958. And Donald Kehoe's subsequent letter to President Truman opens with Mr. Campbell's UFO book. Nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman claims this veteran researcher has an exciting story to tell. So if you would, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Art Campbell.
First, he has to get up on the stage. We're going to keep this very informal. I like the informal atmosphere you've set here. So I can't see you very well because I'm blinded by some lights, but if you do have a question or so during the presentation, please feel free to ask it. We'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards. What we're going to see today, I would have been making this presentation in the second dining room at Leavenworth 50 years ago. The material was absolutely so secret, I didn't think Mamie Eisenhower knew about it. And I doubt very seriously if some of the high people in the government knew much about it at all. So we're going to take you on a little journey back to 1955 and some of the things that Steve was talking about. We're going to start down here with where it all started. Yeah, I got to get the thing moving here. Help. I got to aim with the projector. That always helps. Okay. This was the Red Chinese. Eisenhower was very concerned because in September 1954, the Red Chinese started shelling the offshore islands of Formosa. And obviously, they were getting ready to invade Formosa. Now, we had just signed a armistice with them in the Korean War the year before. And so we were more or less enemies at the time. So this kind of sets the stage for what was going on in those years. John Foster Dulles, Ike's Secretary of State. The U.S. has new and powerful weapons of precision. He's talking atomic here, folks. And Eisenhower himself made a comment. In any combat where nuclear weapons are used, they can be used strictly on military targets. So we're not talking here about dropping one big bomb on a city. We're talking about nuclear shells, nuclear, various kinds of tactical nuclear weapons. So as the Komatsu crisis unfolded, Eisenhower asked and was granted by Congress to give him what they called a blank check to start a war with Red China with a thing called the Formosa Resolution. I think Ike was drawing a line in the sand. I think Ike dug a trench in the sand because a lot of people were starting to fall in it. The person that pushed this resolution through the House was Senator Lyndon B. Johnson. How many, any Vietnam veterans out here? Remember the Gulf of Tonkin? But Johnson tried to pull this in the Gulf of Tonkin and didn't work out that well. Anyhow, that sets the stage for what we're going to talk about here. Back to the main menu. If I get it here, we're on camera and everything. There it is. Okay. So we go back up here now to Ike, and it's the first time it's been presented, and maybe the last actually. But we're going to start in here with the bird hunt, and okay, here we are. Eisenhower makes this comment at a press conference in Washington, D.C. on the 9th of February 1955. Good morning, please be seated. Press conference, February 9, 1955. One announcement of little importance for anyone except myself. I hope to get a few hours away from this city starting tomorrow afternoon. I'm going down to Secretary of the Treasury to his farm in Georgia. The Secretary of the Treasury in those days' name was Humphrey, and he owned a plantation down near Thomasville, Georgia. So we have the leader of the free world, like Steve said, things are ready to break out all over, and he goes bird hunting. This is him the year before, and he was a great hunter, pretty good shot. I understand he couldn't hit a rat in a latrine one time with 9 shots from a .45 automatic, but he was pretty good with a shotgun. This is the cottage where Eisenhower stayed. We should all be so lucky to have a cottage like this. And there were several of these buildings on the plantation, by the way, which was very secure. No one got in and out. There were guards on the gate, and at this particular time, Secret Service guards. So when I got behind that gate and down the road into this plantation, no one knew where he was, what he was doing, and that's the way they wanted it. He was going bird hunting, of course. So, did he actually go bird hunting? Well, let's go take a look at Airman Kirtland over here. Kirtland was the guy that wrote a letter, 7-page letter, to me sometime back in about 2005 or 6, somewhere in there. And Kirtland, so there, okay, it's okay, bear with me. He was a 2nd class airman, and he was with the 65th, 80th U.S. Air Force Hospital, Holloman Air Force Base. Now, the first thing I do was try to check people out. Are they really there? I have this guy's military records. I have 7 pages of his military records. He had a secret clearance. He got in trouble with his boss. He was transferred, and everything he told me was 100% accurate. I have no reason to believe that what you're about to hear is untrue.
My name is Bill Kirkland, and we're together here at the Dwight David Eisenhower Museum Library. In the background there, you can see the Eisenhower home. Now, I became involved in Eisenhower, or became interested in Eisenhower, when I joined the Air Force in 1953. March 23rd. I was an aviation specialist, high altitude chamber person, and I was stationed at George Air Force Base after the training at Gunter Air Force Base. And while I was there, they didn't have a high altitude chamber there. So we worked at the hospital. And I was an orderly there at the hospital. While I was there in 1954, a friend of mine by the name of Ben Luth was also an orderly. He was in the operation room area, and he was asked to go aboard an ambulance down to Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino. And he was going there with an ambulance because Eisenhower was landing in an airplane and they did not have enough medical people to supply emergency equipment for everybody that was coming in. So I asked Ben what had happened when he went down there, and he says he landed and he got off and he went aboard a C-45. I said, what's a C-45? I knew what a C-46 was, I knew what a C-47 was, I knew what a C-54 was, but I didn't know what a C-45 was. He says it's a Beechcraft 2-engine aircraft that is used for shuttling personnel. Well, that is a tail dragger, and I said, well, what did he do? He said he went aboard and flew off towards Palmdale. Well, Palmdale is over the mountain and the wrong way from Palm Springs. So I was wondering what he was doing flying the wrong way from Palm Springs, where he said that he was going to go on a vacation or go golfing or something. So that's how I became involved in this.
Okay. Let's talk about the parade off here. And I need to get that yellow. Whoops, play, okay. Bear with me. There it is.
After George Air Force Base, I was sent to Holloman Air Force Base to work in the Aeromed Laboratory under Colonel Stapp. And while I was there, I flew with Kittinger on trying to recover one of the high-altitude balloons.
Exactly, who was Kittinger?
Kittinger was Captain Kittinger, and he was a pilot, and he was involved in the balloon research program. He was the one who set a record jumping out of a gondola from over 100,000 feet and exceeding the speed of sound coming down. He almost lost his life, or some of the equipment went bad, and he had a long free fall, and we had to treat him when he came back for cold on his wrist. The gauntlet between his gloves and his diving suit, or his suit, spacesuit, came loose, and he got pretty cold on the way down. Now, the reason this aerospace or high-altitude balloon stuff is very important is this was advanced research. This was state-of-the-art research that the Air Force was doing into cosmic rays and how it would affect human beings, whether human beings could really survive in outer space, and so forth. I worked with under Colonel Stapp, who rode the rocket sled.
Sort of a pre-space program then, wasn't it?
Right, it was the pre-space program before the astronauts. That was in 54 and 55. I goofed up and was sent to there at the laboratory, and I was sent to the hospital at Holloman, and I worked in the flight surgeon's office.
What kind of goof was it?
Oh, well, I didn't put water into a humidifier for the eggs, for maintaining eggs and getting them to hatch. It was my fault, you know, but I didn't do it. So they sent me to the base hospital, and I worked for a man by the name of Dr. Reiner, Captain Dr. Reiner, Robert Reiner. I liked him, and he liked me. And while I was there, during February of 1955, he asked me if Eisenhower was coming to the base and if I wanted to work or if I wanted to go to a parade. I said, I didn't want to go to a parade. He said, okay, you're working.
What kind of a parade was it?
Well, it was an honors parade. The President of the United States comes in and you can have an honor parade for him.
Kind of a red carpet kind of a thing?
Oh, yes, that's what's required. You know, military, you get full honors if you're President of the United States. A full honors parade is required if you're President of the United States. And he requested that there be no parade. So the parade was called off the day before he was supposed to land.
So hundreds of men knew Ike was coming to Holloman. Okay, let's go on down to the coffee area, and he's going. This is Airman Dorsey coming in now. Let's hear he's talking about Dorsey.
So when I went to normal work the next morning, at about 8 o'clock, I walked into the flight surgeon's office and I was asked by the nurse if I had seen Dorsey. And Dorothea Thorenson, who worked there, said, I saw him. She says, and he was going to the commissary with his wife. So I didn't think anything more of it, and I just went on. Dorothea was a clerk typist in the flight surgeon's office. Yes, a civilian. She was married and she had a very nice car. I remember it was an Oldsmobile Holiday. When she said that he had come in later, I didn't think anything of it. When I went to coffee that day, but before I went to coffee, I saw Dorsey coming down the hall. He was an airman who was in charge of the men, the other airmen, at the flight surgeon's office. And he said, Bill, have you seen what's out there on the flight line? And I'm thinking, no, I haven't seen anything. He says, you should go and see it. I said, what is it? He said, it's a disc. When he said disc, I'm thinking a disc like we threw at college, about this big, with a silver or stainless steel rim, wood, and
the track discus that they use the track.
Oh yes, that was a track discus. Yeah. That's what I expected. He says, no. I said, what's it made out of? He said, metal. And I said, oh, what's its color? He says, silvery, stainless polished steel, stainless steel or silver. And I said, well, how big is it? I'm still thinking 12 inches or less. He said, 20 to 30 feet. I said, what's it doing? He says, hovering in the air. The only craft that I knew could hover was the hovercraft that the Navy was talking about building, flying pancake or flying flapjack, the hovercraft that would come in off the shore, and a helicopter. And this wasn't any of those. So I said, well, I'll go and see it. He says, it's out in front, just go to the front of the hospital and take a look. So to do that, I had to ask permission. And I went up to where an officer was being examined and knocked on the door, and the nurse came to it and said, I said, can I go to the front of this hospital and look down flight way? And she looked at the doctor and she said no, so I didn't go.
Okay, let's talk about the flyover here. So I think we'll go down to the office here first. This one here, Reiner's office. Very, very interesting thing here.
That night after supper, I looked at the flight surgeon's office, and one of my jobs is to check and make sure that the lights and everything was secure. I saw lights over there. So I went in the back way, and when I went into the back way, I saw Captain Reiner talking to a lieutenant colonel who was dressed in blue. Reiner had his white coat-like, smock-like on. They were talking. And the colonel said, I don't know about others. He says, well, I'm telling you what I saw. He said, I was standing on the stage with him. And Reiner spoke up and said, I heard that he spoke also at the base theater. He said he might have. He only spoke a couple of minutes at one place, and then the base commander took over, and he spoke for about 20 minutes. There was plenty of time for him to go from the supply hangar to the base, to the base theater and back again. He said, I'm telling you what I saw. Standing room only in the supply hangar, 225 men each time. He said, there might have been a third time. He said, but I wasn't there. And I said, who spoke? And the lieutenant colonel said, Commander-in-Chief. And I said, the President. And he said, the Commander-in-Chief. He repeated himself. Well, I know and you know that the Commander-in-Chief is the President. I said, what did he talk about? He says, it's classified. And I said, see, he said, it's classified. I said, confidential? He said, higher. I said, secret? He said, higher. I said, oh. Dr. Reiner liked me, and this colonel was a personal friend of Dr. Reiner's. Now, I don't know what his name was, but I remember him being there before, okay? Dr. Reiner and the lieutenant colonel that they were talking about. Now, the lieutenant colonel said that he had repeated himself and said that it was confidential and that it was the president or the commander-in-chief that had spoke at the supply hangar. And Reiner had said that he had heard that he had spoken at the base theater. Now, the lieutenant colonel said it was 225 people each time that he spoke. That's 450 people.
Was this the meeting your friend Dorsey was at?
It had to be one of those meetings because he was involved in a meeting somewhere. Now, I didn't know whether he went, and I would assume he went either to the base theater or to the supply hangar. There were things that were implied and implicitly secret. For example, I did not have but a secret clearance. I was not qualified to hear top secret. Later on, not that night, but the next day, I had a car there, and we had some guys with me, and they picked up some girls we knew, and we went to see if we could get into the memorial, the White Sands Memorial.
The monument area, the park area there?
Yeah.
How big of an area would that be?
You're
miles?
talking about square miles. You're talking, 5 miles, at least 4 or 5 square miles.
Some of that beautiful white sand.
Yes, that's what it is, the White Sands area. And we weren't allowed in the back part of it at all. When you get a pass there, it's good for 3 days. So we had a pass for 3 days. And the next day we went back and we could drive through it. But there was nothing there.
Sergeant Albert D. Wyckoff. He's in the Bay Area. I did this interview with him in Oakland, California last fall. This is his introduction.
Of course, this is me when I was a young kid. This is my Bronze Star. This is my 2 Purple Hearts. I was born 6/4/1925 in San Francisco. My father left us during the Depression, and he was killed in an accident in 1937. My mother was very fortunate during the Depression. In 1933, she got a job in what they called the Taste Good bakeries, cooked on a night shift. And then, of course, my job at home was that I take the lids off of the stove, and I would heat them up and then put them in the bed so she'd have a warm bed when she got home for work.
How old were you at this time?
At this time, I was about 11 years old.
Uh-huh.
With the money my mother got from the state because of the accident, she put me in the St. Dominic's Catholic school, which I completed, and then went on to public school. I went to Pacific Heights and then on to Lowell High School in San Francisco. I volunteered when I was 17. My mother signed the papers to go into the service. 1943, I went to Camp Abbott for training. Then I left there and went to mechanic school. And when I completed that, I volunteered in 1944 for B-29s. And and I was a tail gunner. The B-17 was flying in 1936, so they had all the bugs out of it. The B-29 was on the drawing board in 1943 and flying in 1944. And in doing so, we had a lot of trouble, overheating of engines and stuff like that. I was assigned to the 919th Bomb Group with the 20th Air Force. The B-29 could fly about 22 hours. And of course we had to go by Iwo Jima. And when we went by Iwo Jima, the Japanese fighters would come up like flies. So they got a few of us and we got a few of them. The first B-29, there were 3 of them. They flew over Tokyo, not to bomb it, but to take photo missions. And Tokyo Rose came out and said, boy, what an airplane they got. They couldn't even get the bombs out. But this was a photo mission. And 2 weeks later, we bombed Tokyo Rose and put her off the air for about 2 weeks. We were flying at around 30,000 feet and the Japanese couldn't get up there. So when General LeMay took over Guam, he made us go lower for better bombing. At one time we flew at 4,000 feet when we were firebombing Tokyo. And what they did, they took all the gunners out and the guns except the tail gunner. And that was, the tail gunner could report to the pilot what the results were. Then when the Marines went into Iwo Jima, approximately 7,000 were killed. The P-51s come in and they flew cover for us, and we never had any more trouble with the Japanese because of what the Marines did on Iwo Jima. They saved over 20,000 airmen that had to crash land or land because of engine trouble or being shot up. We, just prior to that, they took that. We had one that flew. He didn't make it. He crashed in the water right off the coast. That's how close it was. Everybody got out all right. when they took Okinawa, they built a field there, and they were, they needed tail gunners. We could go bomb 2 and 3 times a day.
Well, how far were you from the mainland of Japan, from Okinawa?
Let's see, I would say offhand, probably about a 3-hour trip.
3-hour trip, okay.
So we could make 2, sometimes 3 bombing missions at Sasebo, Fukuoka.
Now, what was at Fukuoka?
And that's where they made the miniature submarines. So that's what we did.
Now, you couldn't get B-29s into Okinawa, right?
Right.
Okay.
And they had a major fighter base there. So that's what they transferred gunners there to fly in B-24s and B-25s. And that was a lot more important because we knocked out an awful lot of the fighters.
Can we talk about the atomic bomb? Where were you when you heard about the atomic bomb had been set off?
I was about 100 miles from there. While I was at Hamilton Air Force Base, we made 3 flights to New Mexico. We didn't know where we were going. The pilot knew where we were going, but we didn't know. We couldn't get out of the airplane. They fueled it for us. And they also brought us food, but we weren't clear to get off the airplane at that point. So
Did you have some cargo that you took away?
we had cargo that had to be unloaded there. We brought that from Travis. Yeah, we found out later that was parts that was used for the atomic bomb. But we couldn't get off the airplane or anything. We even slept overnight on the airplane.
When they dropped the bomb, what did you think?
Well, I felt it was the right thing to do because I think that over 1 million Americans would have been killed trying to take Japan. Was they came and asked if I want to fly a B-29 and take it back to the States. So that's what I did.
And when did you arrive back in the States?
Well, I arrived at Travis Air Force Base. That time it was called Suisun Fairfield Air Force Base. And my parents met me and took me out to dinner, and oh boy, what a feed. When I got recalled into the Air Force in 1950, well, it was actually 1951, I was in an airplane accident, and I had another airplane accident where I split my head open, and it ruined my back. My wife had just lost her first child, and the chaplain and the base commander said, you know, you're due to go to Korea, but in your condition, if you volunteer for Baccalaureate Air Force Base out in Indiana, any other, that's where you go. So we were fortunate. We went there and stayed there. And my wife was pregnant with our actually the second child. And I says, they can't send me overseas. Let's just stay in the next year and then we'll get out. So that's what we did. While I was out in Indiana, my job was loading and delivering cargo. We went to Washington, where they opened the new base with cargo, and just kind of anything they wanted, we would fly it.
What other bases did you go to?
Well, I went to March and Holloman 2 or 3 times. We hauled what we think is stuff for the atomic bomb.
Dave, what do you recall about Holloman?
Well, we had to haul a load of stuff down there, parts that they needed, and the runway is like this. And I never seen anything like that before. And anyway, as we were there, we saw Air Force One come in. And we didn't know who it was. And then an officer come around and says, "You can't leave." And I says, "Well, the pilot said we have to leave." And he says, "Well, President Eisenhower's here, and you can't leave the field until he's gone." And I says, you could hear him over loudspeakers, but it didn't do any good, you know. I would have liked to have seen him. And this officer, we didn't have the clearance to go into the mess hall. And one of the other officers, a higher ranking officer, came to us and says, "Would you like to go in and eat and listen to a speech?" And most of us said, "Yeah," because I'd like to see him. I didn't get to shake his hand or anything, but because I didn't have the right badge, clearance, to go in, but they did leave us go in at the very end, and we ate and listened to his speech.
What do you think of him?
I thought he was great. He had a lot of good ideas. Maybe he had some I disagreed with, but I don't agree with everybody anyway, you know.
Dave, you remember what date that was that you were there?
The reason I know when he was there is here's when I got discharged. He was there in mid-February of 1955. That was my last trip that I made while I was in the service. Then I was discharged and I came back home to the Bay Area with my family.
Dave here is talking about being at Holloman Air Force Base, and he was getting ready to take off the next morning. He brought in freight the day before from back of our Air Force Base in Indiana. And he's a staff sergeant. He has a crew of people in a C-47, I think they were in. And they went down to take off, and they said, "You had a plane coming in. You can't take off right now." They only have 2 runways at Holloman. Well, coming in on one runway was Air Force One with Eisenhower. And they said, "There's the president's plane and watch him land." They said, "No, we take off." "Oh no, you can't take off till he leaves." So they essentially were marooned there all day long while I talked at the hangar, you heard earlier, and at the base theater, and we don't know exactly what that's all about, but I have an idea. So he and some guys went to the chow hall, and they were asked by a major if they wanted to hear Ike speak. So here's an eyewitness, saw Ike's plane land, heard Ike speak all the time he's supposed to be hunting birds in Georgia. And it's a very, very credible witness. It's too bad we have a glitch here, but it's hard to get to it. Now maybe we can go to the chicken. I think you'll enjoy that. That's a daughter of an electrician that contacted me. She had a friend that read UFO magazine. and an article we'd written in there about Eisenhower. She called me from Nebraska and said, if you ever get back here, I have a story to tell you. She wouldn't talk much over the phone, but we did get her interviewed. So let me get back to the menu here. And she's the one with the chickens. Come on, chickens, there you go. Now we play it. Patricia Sorensen, daughter. She lives in southeast Nebraska. We did this interview about a year ago.
Well, welcome to my home, and I'm Pat. I live near Auburn, Nebraska. I'm one of two children, and we moved back here in 1969. Before that, we were out west in, my dad worked for big power companies from 56 to 69 before we came here. And Dad, in 1954, Dad got a job at Holloman, and we had moved down to Holloman, where Billy and I went to Dudley School. And Dad was active in all the, he was active in the Lions Club. He was active in the Joseph Catholic Church. He was worked with the Republican Party, and he was also an electrician. And so was Uncle Bert. They were both electricians, and this is some of the stuff. And this is his hat, what I always keep around to remind me. And he also was a pilot. He flew. This is him in Cessna and this is who he was in. He was also a pilot in the Army. He actually learned to fly in the Army, but he was actually just was in the Army. He didn't fly there. But how we found each other, how I found you, was I had a friend that took the UFO magazine, and there was an article about Eisenhower that you had written, and he remembered it, and he gave me the phone number and your address and stuff was in there. So I called you, and we started corresponding, and when I said to you, if you ever get out here to the Midwest, to stop by and see me, because I wanted to talk to you about Dad's story, that when he was over in Holloman in the Air Force Base. Let's see. Now I guess a little general information about my dad was he was born in southeast Nebraska in 1927. I got I brought out some memorabilia stuff to show you. Oh, here's Billy. Yeah, that's my brother when he was a baby. This is a picture when Dad was in the Single Corps at Camp Gordon, and he loved to climb his poles. There he is with his friend Jim, and he was practicing going up and down. And there he is again working at cleaning the weapons and getting message pickup. And here's some of his Nebraska fan memorabilia that he loved so much. And he had this with him he had a few plane crashes, and he always had this picture with him. He was very fond of his religion. And this is a current events school newspaper that we used to get every week. This was in the week of February to March 2nd of 1956, and it was showing these Air Force balloons that were going up. It was every other day in Holloman. We used to just run around and we didn't know that there was anything exciting to know about it. We just thought it was very normal. Oh, and here's some pictures. My dad loved also to do photography, and here is. This is Dad it was with Nixon and Agnew in 1972, and this is in Omaha. Nixon was here in Omaha in 1970, and he got invited to the inaugural ball and he didn't have his flash, and he was so upset. But there is his own picture, and he was quite involved with the party. He used to fly the Republicans locally when he moved here in the late 60s. He flew the party members to meetings over southeast Nebraska, and then when Nixon came, he flew the Republican National Committee members in 1970 when they were stumping for Nixon, and he suggested that they talk about the Nebraska football because they played in the Orange Bowl in '69 for the national championship, and so Nixon started his speech in Omaha with Dad's idea about bringing up football, and he also played in Tarkio because he was a stocky person. He loved his football. But anyway, there's some other things here. So I've got some letters right here. I'm sure I'll find that one. Yeah, here's the one that Mom and Dad wrote. Okay, that's Auburn, Nebraska, October 26, 1989. Dear kids, it's beautiful fall here with the usual pumpkins up and down the main drag. Kids are getting excited. Your father and I are doing well. Heard from Helen. She said the grandchild came on time, and although Sharon was in labor, you don't need to talk about that. Anyway, Dad has just come from the kitchen with a cup of coffee, and he says he doesn't mind telling the fireman story again, but you kids know it better after all these years. But he'll recall what he can. All right, this is the part. Well, you kids and Mom moved down from Albuquerque. I think it was in the summer of 1954. As you recall, I had taken the Holloman job that previous winter, and Mom wanted us all together, so we rented a place over near Dudley Elementary School on Maryland, wasn't it? Remember, you kids could walk to school. You were in the 4th grade, and Billy was in 1st or 2nd. Anyhow, sometime after Christmas of '55, we were told President Eisenhower was coming. So George, our boss then at the electric shop, went to a meeting to find out more. He would not be inspecting anything, and they said just carry on as usual. If you see the president, don't gawk, wave, or anything, just carry on. So the day the president came, we went out in the truck to a job where we were replacing some wire down the flight line. It was really old stuff, but that put there in World War II, and unsafe. So we heard the president's plane in the morning, lining up for an approach, and watched it land on the far runway. So we waited for it to taxi over to the flight line so we could see him. But we didn't hear it anymore, and it had shut down somewhere out there. So we went ahead and pulled wire for a while, and one of the men, I believe it was Charlie, said he can see out there from that pole over there. So why don't one of us go up the pole and see where the plane is? Well, I had my climbers on, and I started to unbuckle them and was waiting to give them to the first volunteer, when someone said I should do it as people were used to seeing me up on the poles anyway. So I started up with my back to the sun, a safety measure, which also put my back to the runway where we thought his Connie was. Connie was a nickname for the big constellation the president flew. As I started up, some of the guys reminded me not to gawk, and I heard them laugh. A few minutes later, I heard some shouting, and some guys tarring a hangar roof nearby started to run, pointing out to the runways. Then I heard our truck start up, and some of the crew jumped in with one or two running after it. And they were pointing out to the flight line, and so I decided to turn around on the pole to see what the ruckus was about, and I could not believe what I saw. There was this pie tin-like thing coming at me about 150 feet away. I thought it was remote controlled or something. 25 to 30 feet across, and I started down the pole as fast as I could go. I was up about 40 feet, and I threw my climbing rope out, gave it slack, and only touched the spike on each side of the pole 3 or 4 times on each side in before I got to the bottom. While I was running towards the big hangar, I looked back, and it had stopped and was just sitting there. Well, when we all got back to the shop and we had a good laugh, one of the guys who saw me come down said he got down that pole faster than a fireman. So as you kids were growing up and we had the family gatherings, you used to ask to tell me about the time I became a fireman. You know, I always wondered why we did not use that thing during Vietnam and so forth. And over the years I realized if we had technology like that, it would have saved lots of lives. But I gradually realized that it had something to do with Ike being there that day. And it wasn't ours. It was an unwritten rule at Holloman. You didn't talk about what you saw, and after that day, it was seldom mentioned at the shop. I still have those climbers here someplace. Billy used to play with them. Remember? Mom here again. Well, Dad's wandered outside someplace. He said something about checking the pump. It's been sluggish lately. Dad thinks the motor's old and needs rewinding. He spends several hours a week up at Harold's helping out with mechanical and electrical stuff for farm equipment. Dr. Fornash says it's okay for Dad to drive a little around town, but to keep an eye on him. He thinks Dad has had a mini stroke or two, but should not do any highway driving at night. He drags his left foot a little, but gets out to the golf course in good weather. But he has to use a cart now. We're looking forward to seeing all you at Christmas. Say hi to Bob and Warren for us and hug the twins. All of our love. Mom and Dad.
This is a man who was on a telephone pole and was chased off by a UFO. Now, he didn't know it was going to stop. He thought it was something made by the Germans, who were in Operation Paperclip at that time, working around Holloman and White Sands, and then doing some work with rockets. But these people were like all of us in those days, didn't know a thing about UFOs. The movie came out, UFO, in 1956, a year after this incident happened. Most of us didn't know anything, believe me. Talk about zilch. We didn't know a thing. So I think perhaps we'll go down to the two gentlemen down here at the bottom with Life magazine. The one is Dr. Simons. He's the one that had the balloon ascent. He was at Holloman in 1955. We wrote him and he would not answer the question, although he answered other questions in the same letter. The guy up to his left side there, the Air Force guy, wrote the Life magazine. His name was Kittinger. He flew with Mr. Kirtland, we saw earlier, but would not admit the fact that he was there when Eisenhower was there. So we have the high officers. Obviously, there's obviously a cover-up. Now, the older gentleman we saw earlier, we won't go into that video, but we found on the roster of the Air Force One for 1955, and we got the material from the Eisenhower Library, we found 13 Secret Service agents. And I asked this gentleman, who was the Air Force One man in the 1955, he was not on this trip, but his friend was. And I asked him if 13 was more than, oh, he said, we never had 13. Later on, after we got off the video, he said, well, yes, there was a time in the mid-50s when they got double Secret Service agents. Half of them were supervisors, he said, so they could trust him. 5 stayed where Ike was hunting and pretended he was there by running in and out with cars. 5 went with him out west. This had to be the same time. He was able to tell us that, not about Ike and the UFOs, but he was able to tell us that there was a time when Ike skipped out and went out, and he needed a double bunch of Secret Service agents. 3 of them were supervisors. So anyhow, down in the right-hand corner is a gentleman who was likely to play halfback for the New York Giants. His name was Roy Kimmerman. Roy Kimmerman was on this flight as one of the Secret Service agents. Does anybody recall who Roy Kimmerman was? JFK what? Secret Service. Right. Roy Kimmerman, good memory. Roy Kimmerman was in charge of the detail when JFK was shot. He was on this plane with Eisenhower and went to Holloman. Arthur Godfrey, his name came up. It turns out Arthur Godfrey was not part of the hunting party. He didn't hunt. And this gentleman told us that Arthur Godfrey was a frequent flyer on Air Force One. And we finally got to a website called Conelrad, and it told us what it was all about. In 1992, Time magazine had a big article on what we were going to do if we'd been attacked by nuclear war, in a nuclear war. And the government had retained Edward R. Murrow and Arthur Godfrey as two voices that people who knew and understood, and some of you older folks know what I'm talking about out there. They were going to make an announcement in case we'd been attacked by nuclear weapons, that all was okay and our government was still functioning. So here we have practically an international crisis in those days, and Arthur Godfrey is on Air Force One. I find that incredible. It had nothing to do with UFOs, but boy, there was a lot of other stuff going on in the world, and obviously the connection Arthur Godfrey had with making the public service announcement that everything would be okay if we got attacked by nuclear bombs. They may have thought that they better have him on that flight in case we were attacked by nuclear bombs. So this one flight was absolutely incredible. All the people on there, some of them were famous, some of them would be famous, like Kellerman. And Kellerman kind of got the blame for the Kennedy assassination, although he was the agent in charge. No one could have stopped that. So I think we'd be ready for some questions. Do we have a side mic hooked up over here? I see right now just silhouettes, so I can't see your hands. Yeah, let's get the mic going into questions. Now we'll begin to take questions on the Plains of St. Augustine research, as well as any of this coming up here. We were almost 14 years on the Plains of St. Augustine research. And there was a second craft goes down. Stanton Friedman has supported that for years. And I think my book pretty well establishes the fact that it is. You may find it back there on the table as well as a CD. Thank you.